Welcome to JCT TV. This is Bible study for the 21st century. It's so good to have you on board, friends. I'm Jim Cantelon. I have a guest today that is amazing. His name is Bill Webster, Dr. Bill Webster. He is an expert, although he doesn't like the word, in grief counseling. He has experienced two major bereavements in his life. He has a doctorate in the topic. He's written a number of books, and you will want to hear him. Don't miss it.
Jim Cantelon Today is a program dedicated to the teaching of the good news of Jesus Christ. This all through the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. JCT also brings to you encouraging testimonies and stories from Christian leaders all over the globe. If this program has added value to your life, would you please consider becoming a partner? To do so, simply contact us by phone, mail, or online.
So as I said off the top, friends, I'm really, really pleased to have Dr. Bill Webster with me and with you for this program and for the subsequent 3 or 4 programs after this. He is a man with a tremendous compassion for you if you're grieving, especially. And I would say this, I've never said this before on this show, but this is the kind of program that you want to either PVR it or let your friends know about it, especially those who've undergone some kind of bereavement in the past few years, because Dr. Bill Webster is one of the finest spokespersons anywhere in the world for those and to those who have encountered the loss of a loved one. So Bill, you've been involved now in this ministry of bringing comfort to the grieving for what, 25 years?
Actually, 35 years.
35 years.
Yes.
35 years. Okay, I wasn't sure how long it had been. And really the catalyst for this, I understand, was the loss of your first wife.
That's correct.
Tell me about that.
I had met my wife in London University in England and fell in love immediately, love at first sight for me, if not for her.
Right.
Took a bit of persuasion, but that's okay. I was up to the challenge, I guess. And I came to Canada. We were married. I was a minister at the time, and we had 2 sons. And 11 years after we were married, Carolyn suddenly, unexpectedly, suffered a massive heart attack and died on the spot.
How old was she?
She was just in her late 30s.
Late 30s.
Yeah.
No preamble, no warning. It just happened.
It just happened.
Walk me through the impact right from the get-go on you.
Well, to be honest, when the doctor said your wife has died, I said, you must be kidding. It's impossible. This can't be. I don't believe it. Are you sure it's her? It's a big mistake. There's something, you're being given a fact, but it gets so far and then it just doesn't get any further. And I think what happens when something like this occurs, whether it's a sudden death or even after a long lingering illness, there's just that sense of shock, numbness. You just don't believe it's really happening. So you go through the time of the funeral and you go to the funeral home, you go to the funeral service, and you still don't believe it. This is a bad dream.
I'm going to waken up at any minute.
Now, if people are comforting you and making condoling comments, they're not registering, obviously. Or if they do, maybe you don't like them.
Well, no, that's right. But actually, I think there's something else. Because people come to a funeral and they're upset because they believe it. I mean, when you hear that someone out there has died, you believe it, so you're upset. So people come to the funeral and they're more upset than the actual grieving person.
You're in denial.
So you end up comforting them. And
now you're looking at this from, the 40,000 foot level, but at the point of its impact, when it first happened to you, were you aware of the fact that you were in this kind of denial or in this kind of space where you just didn't believe it?
Well, denial is an interesting word. I think sometimes people think of denial as a negative, but actually denial is part of our God-given system that says you're not ready to face this yet. So whether we call it numbness, shock, denial, post-traumatic stress disorder, whatever we call it, this is our defense mechanism. And I think the defense mechanism kicks in. Many times you go to a funeral and you're surprised how well the grieving person seems to be doing. And people say, oh, you're so strong, you're coping. They are strong, but they're numb. And sometimes it's a month or two down the road, sometimes much longer, that the numbness wears off and people are ready to begin to face the reality. The problem is that sometimes 3 months down the road, people are saying, well, it's been 3 months, you ought to be over it by now. But you never get over it, you get through it. But not in 3 months. Sometimes 3 months after a person dies, it feels 1,000 times worse than it did the day they passed away, because the numbness has now worn off and you're beginning to feel the emotions and the reality. And that was the difficulty for me, because I felt, rightly or wrongly, that I didn't get a lot of support or understanding. People don't understand grief. We don't like to talk about death. We don't like to think about it happening to us or our loved ones. And so when the person is going through a grief process, we don't understand it, and we automatically think something's not right here. This isn't going the way we thought it was going to go, and you're left feeling abandoned.
Now, often when you hear about some kind of a public tragedy, whether it's a mass shooting or train derails or a plane crashes or so on, the news reporters will say, as if this is a plus, well, grief counselors are on the scene. Mm-hmm. What you're telling me is that a grief counselor can talk till they're blue in the face, but it's not going to register with someone who's numb.
That's absolutely correct. Thank you for asking the question, because I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. I'm a grief counselor. Yeah. I have qualifications, credentials as a grief counselor. Yeah. What is required in these moments is not grief counseling, it's crisis management. And the first principle of crisis management is sustainment, calming things down. And sometimes, I must admit, I get a little bit annoyed sometimes when interviewers come up to a grieving family. It's only been a few hours, and say, and how does it feel?
Right.
And they haven't a clue how it feels, because they don't believe it. Yeah. And they're numb and they're in shock. And so I think sometimes we do a grave disservice to people. I remember after 9/11, there was an interviewer on one of the major TV stations said, well, I was here a year ago and there were grief counselors here, but here we are a year later and it doesn't seem like people have gotten over it. Well, duh, and you think, what's the expectation? Because, years and years after that event, people are still grieving and mourning the loss of those who died on that day.
No, we're going to have a lot of time. We've got several interviews over the next few weeks, but we may visit this again. Is there a best approach to someone who is in this state of numbness? You talk about crisis management. Is that pretty much all you can do? Or is there something else you can do? Or is there anything you can say at a time like that?
There is no one neat, orderly way to get through grief. Yeah. And I think the biggest thing may seem like the most obvious, the most simple thing. And we do that. It's being there. Being there. I don't think we can ever underestimate how much it means for someone just to be there, to just let you know that they care, because sometimes the grieving person doesn't want to talk about it. Yeah. They don't want to go into a grief counseling session. They don't want people giving them cliches and easy answers. They just want to know that somebody cares about them. Somebody's willing to listen to them. Or, even more difficult, somebody's willing to sit with them in the silence, if that's what they need to do. So, there are structures, there are systems, and I'm not knocking that at all. But I think sometimes we make it too mechanical, and it's not an easy process to go through.
So the power of presence.
Absolutely.
Just presence.
Absolutely.
I remember one situation that I was, I'm also a pastor, and a little 12-year-old girl had just been struck by a car, and she had died. And they called me, the police actually called me. I don't know why they did, but they did. So I actually arrived at the hospital before the parents did. I waited for them, and then we walked down to the morgue together, the three of us, and walked into the door, and there she was. The impact on me was, of course, not as powerful as it was on them, because she was their daughter, not mine. But at that moment, Bill, I experienced a little bit of what you're talking about, because they just refused to believe it was her. Is that? No, it's not. Yeah. And I realized at that time exactly what you're saying, that as a pastor, I should just keep my mouth shut. And I just stood there, and then they began to weep, of course. But then I just spent the next few weeks, before the funeral, after the funeral, just showing up.
Right.
Did anyone show up for you when your wife died?
Not many, because I was the pastor. I was supposed to be the one who, in people's perception, look, Jim, I have become convinced over the years, people mean well.
Yeah.
People are sincere. We don't want to be putting out an indictment, but people kind of feel that sometimes you have the answers. Mm-hmm. As a grief counselor, you go through your own personal losses, and you have the answers, but it's easier to have the answers for other people than it is for yourself. See, I observed something as obviously it still touches you years later. And I think that any of us who have had a 12-year-old child are going to be touched by a story like this, because this could have been me. This could have been my child. So I think that even when we're there in the situation as helpers, there's the personal part that says, well, this is somebody's spouse, somebody's parent, somebody's child. It could be mine. This could be me. And so I think we have this empathetic grief, which really talks about our own mortality as well.
And that can become a very powerful nonverbal communication with the person who has lost someone, just to understand that you have that empathic sense for them. You identify with them. Friends, we're just getting going here, and you're going to want to keep watching JCT over the next few weeks, because Dr. Bill Webster will be my guest. There's so much more we got to talk about here. It's a very, very profound, moving, and everyday kind of story. It's a grim reality every day in North America. There's a mass shooting somewhere. There's also road accidents, there's cancers, there's heart attacks, there's all kinds of other calamities that come into people's lives, mostly unannounced, without warning. And you can't really think about anything more relevant than what we're talking about. So you keep watching. Dr. Bill Webster will be with me again next program. And in the meantime, I hope that you'll be comforted. I'll be back with our Bible teaching segment right after this.
Friends, as you know, Jim Cantelon has been offering Cantelon's Casual Commentary as a Bible study supplement to his ongoing exposition of St. Matthew's Gospel on JCT TV. He's excited to offer Volume 4, which completes the Matthew study. The Transfiguration, Triumphal Entry, Crucifixion, and Resurrection of Jesus Christ are all covered in this volume. Like the first 3 volumes, it's concise, captivating, and casual. To order your copy, you can call, write, or go online. Request Cantelon's Casual Commentary Volume 4, and for a gift in any amount, it will be sent to you. When you place your order, also consider becoming a monthly partner. Remember, your gifts help us build this ministry.
For those of you who've been watching JCT for the last few years, you know that I've been in Matthew for a little over 2 years, and I might finish it today. If not, it'll be the next show. But it's been a long journey, and I make no apology. I want to take as much time as I can with the scriptures, especially Matthew, Mark, Luke / Acts, because Acts is really volume 2 of Luke, and John. These are the Gospels, and my sense of calling, if you will, is to proclaim the Gospel and teach it to the best of my ability. And so that's why I'm just taking my time, and I hope that you're enjoying it. Don't forget that I've been writing Cantelon's Casual Commentary as well, and this is all 4 tranches of Matthew. I did them like this so I could send them out in an envelope, save a few cents. And also, they're convenient. You can stick them in a Bible or in your pocket or your purse, whatever. Anyway, you can ask for these, and I hope that you will. And when you do, remember our program is supported by people like you. Bless your heart. Mark is coming out next, and this is our first tranche of Mark, and I'll be telling you more about that next program probably, or the one thereafter when we start in the book of Mark. Okay, let's get back to Matthew. Matthew 28. Last time, I looked at the first 3 verses of 28. Let me just reread them, and then we'll get on to 4 and beyond. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. His countenance was like lightning, his clothing as white as snow, and the guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men. Okay, I talked about the women and the recorded appearances that we have in the Gospels after Jesus' resurrection. Last program I talked about that. Okay, now let's pick it up at verse 4, all right? An angel has appeared. The guards shake for fear of him and become like dead men. It's a kind of lightning experience. And if you've ever been close to a strike of lightning, you know how shocking that is. I have been on 2 occasions in my life, and I mean, it just scares the daylights out of you. I remember one time when I was just a teenager, I had just learned how to drive. I had my own little car. I paid $150 for a 1954 Ford Meteor. Worked like a charm. Anyway, I was just coming home from church one Sunday night, and there was an electrical storm, and lightning struck the transformer on a telephone pole right at the intersection I was turning through. I mean, the sight, the sound I felt like it was blowing me off the road, which it didn't, thank the Lord. But when Matthew describes the appearance of this angel, like lightning, I can fully relate to that. These poor soldiers were absolutely mortified, which means becoming like dead men. Okay, so this was obviously a supernatural appearance, supernatural thing was happening, and that leads us to verse 5. But the angel answered and said to the women, okay, do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen as he said. Come see the place where the Lord lay. And go quickly and tell his disciples, he's risen from the dead, and indeed he's going before you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you. Now, the fact is that not only were the soldiers afraid, but so were the women. Why wouldn't they be? I mean, these are just, young adults. And let's not forget, this is a story about young adults. Jesus, when he died, was 33. Most of his disciples would have been in their 20s. Even Mark, probably, even though he wasn't officially a disciple, he was very much acquainted with the whole process of Jesus' life, in that his mother's house was sort of the headquarters for Jesus and the disciples when they were in Jerusalem. And so even as a teenager, he may not have been officially following Jesus, but he certainly was following the story. But this is all about young people, which I think is terrific. But anyhow, the angels say to the women, "He is not here, he is risen." Now, this is the first time these words were ever spoken. In this case, they're spoken by a heavenly messenger. Now, as you know, I planted King of Kings Church in Jerusalem back in 1981 at the invitation of the Israeli government. We didn't actually get the church going until 1983. But the point is that I and my wife and 3 kids lived in Jerusalem for 7 years, and my kids really were raised there, and they still refer to Jerusalem as their hometown, even though they're now all in their 40s. It was a tremendous experience for us, for sure. But many, many times, I would go to the Garden Tomb. Now, there's 2 settings. One is the Roman Catholic setting, which is called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That's inside the city gate. And then there's the one outside the city gate, outside the Damascus gate, now known as the Garden Tomb. I would think most of the historical arguments argue for the historicity of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. At the time of Jesus' burial, it was outside the city gate. Now it's inside, but then it was outside the city gate. It was a place of burial. There were a number of tombs there, a number of caves there. I've been there many, many times. You have to go down and down and down, way below the church, and you see them for yourself. On the other hand, the Garden Tomb site, just outside the Damascus gate, is equally impressive. There's a beautiful new tomb there that you can see it's been carved right out of the rock, the living rock. It's right beside what appears to be a hill that looks like a skull. It has a lot of the earmarks, if you will, of historical reality, but I don't argue for either. I don't think there's any point. I think it's counterproductive. The point is that whether it was the Garden Tomb or whether it was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the tomb is empty. And when you go to the Garden Tomb, there is a sign as you enter the tomb that says, "He is not here, he is risen." And on Easter Sunday morning, for centuries and centuries and centuries, on Easter Sunday morning, or Resurrection Day as I prefer to call it, the pastor will stand before the congregation, the first words of his mouth, "He is risen." And the congregation will respond, "He is risen indeed." And that is still the clarion call of the Christian church. And in fact, it must be, because, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, "If Christ be not risen, then we are yet in our sins. We are of all men most miserable." We've been preaching nothing but an empty, vacuous, meaningless religion. Everything pivots on the empty tomb, friends. Everything. The resurrection is absolutely the pivot point of human history and of the history of the dealings of heaven with earth, God with man. It all revolves around the empty tomb. Without it, Christianity is just one of other great world religions. With it, it's another story. Okay? He is not here. He is risen. One old theologian that I was researching as I was preparing my Cantelon's Casual Commentary for this passage, his name is George Buttrick. He made a very interesting comment. He said, "We live in an enclosed valley called Earth, and Easter takes us to a neighboring height to show us a world vaster than we have dreamed." There's something going on in the heavenlies on Resurrection Day. This resurrection was not something that just had an impact on earth. It resonated in heaven itself. Absolutely vital, absolutely critical, and without it, as I say, with the Apostle Paul, we are of all men most miserable. So the women are afraid, and the angel says, look, don't be afraid. I know you seek Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. He has risen, as he said. Come see the place where the Lord lay. In other words, okay, he promised you this would happen. You didn't get it, and it's true. You read the biblical accounts, and the disciples, whenever Jesus would refer to his resurrection, his death and resurrection, it just went over their heads. It was like they didn't even hear him on that, because they couldn't relate to it. They didn't understand it. He was going to be the Messiah. He was going to establish the kingdom of heaven on earth. He was going to rule the world from Jerusalem in their lifetime. And so this talk about death, no, I don't want to hear about that. So basically they just over their head. Now the angel's reminding them, look, he warned you about this. And he told you he would rise from the dead. And he has risen as he said, all right? He's not here. Come and see the place where he lay. In other words, here's the physical evidence that he's gone.
JCT TV is the official voice of WOW, working for orphans and widows. Jim Cantelon is the founder of WOW and has been ministering to orphans and widows in distress for 18 years. WOW's focus is home-based care for the dying. The horizon is vast, with thousands of the least of these in Africa and India. WOW depends on your generous support. To do so, simply contact us by phone, mail, or online.
Some of you are tuning into JCT for the first time, or maybe just the last few weeks you've been watching it, or maybe on the internet, wherever. You're just kind of getting to know it and know me. I just want you to know that I'm representing not just myself, hopefully I'm representing the gospel, but Jim Cantelon Today Television is the official voice of a missions organization called WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows. This ministry was established by my wife and I 20 years ago. We work in several African countries, and now we've started in India as well, in dealing with, or while visiting orphans and widows in their distress, like James 1:27 says we should do. We're dealing with the lowest of the low, the most vulnerable, those who are dying in many cases from the complications of HIV and AIDS. And we work through local churches, and you see it promoted on the show. I just want you to know, when you support JCT, you're supporting WOW. When you support WOW, you're supporting JCT. Together, we're going to make it happen with your help. Thanks for watching.